This is George Dionne of the Rock is George podcast, and this is a KNAC.com exclusive interview with frontman Blackie Lawless of W.A.S.P. I ask everybody the same question. If I knew absolutely nothing about W.A.S.P, how would you describe the band's music to me?
Wow. I've done 14,000 interviews in my career, and I've never been asked that. That's a good one. You're looking for a one-word answer, or does it matter?
No, you can expand upon it.
Diverse. A primary songwriter who's made a career in effort to hopefully get people to think. Now, I know that doesn't sum up exactly who we are, but it does me as a writer, a performer, because, we go through our careers and we discover, we grow like anybody else. And who you are when you make your first record ain't who you are on your fifth record. And it doesn't matter. Yeah, our first album was an angry record made by an angry band. But, when you've had some degree of success and you're 4 or 5 records down the road and everybody's driving Ferraris, it's kind of hard to be angry. It doesn't have the same effect anymore. So you have to write about who you are at the moment, and that changes. And when you see bands that continue to try, they create a brand, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it if it continues to work for them, but it's difficult to believe that you could write the same things at 50 that you could at 20. So I believe that if any artist, and when I say an artist, I'm talking about not somebody who's around for 5 or 6 years, I'm talking about, you've been around 20, 30 years, something like that. Are you going to take that base that you have, are you going to take them on that lifelong journey? Because that's really what a fan base is all about. Are they going to grow with you, or are they going to change? And when you make a new record, that's basically what you're saying to them is like, okay, this is what I'm thinking now. What do you think about it? And they'll let you know fairly quick, about whether they identify with it or not. So, you said expand, so I'm expanding on the word diversity, but I think that that's fairly accurate.
As a W.A.S.P fan myself, I'd have to agree with your assessment on how W.A.S.P has changed over the years, and your albums certainly either diverse in content or diverse in sound as time goes on. Today we're talking about your upcoming 2024 Album 1 Alive North American tour. This kind of goes back to the angry band making an angry record, but it's certainly a favorite amongst your fans. Had you been planning something like this as the 40th anniversary of the album was approaching?
No. The 40th anniversary was going to be just a one-off. But as we looked at it, to be honest with you, I wasn't sure if it would have any real impact. And so I called around the country, to different promoters that I trust. And I told them the idea, and I said, what do you think? And it was not like I would have thought it would have been. What happened was, to a man, they said almost the same thing. And the first thing that came out of their mouths was, oh, shit. Like they were all reading off the same script. And I realized by that visceral reaction, I was tapping into something that I really didn't understand. And that might sound contrived or naive or whatever you want to call it. But, when you're the artist and you're on the inside of the bubble, you just don't see things a lot of times like people do on the outside. So, I said, so you think that this will work? And they go, better believe it's going to work. And I said, all right, I trust you. Here we go. So it was one of those things that ended up being a pleasant surprise.
In addition to, the importance of W.A.S.P music, there's sort of a visual aspect when it comes to the performances. In the current trailer for the upcoming tour, you say it's going to feature all the fire and all the blood. Have you decided what that's going to entail yet? Or is it still in the planning stages?
Well, we're still in the planning stages. I mean, there's something we're working on right now that I got a quote on today, and it was 10 times what I thought it was going to be. I can't even tell you what it is, but it's something we want to do in the show. What you're going to see, we're going to do two parts. The first half and the second half. The first half of the show will be album one in its entirety, and then we will break, and then we'll come back. In the second half of the show, it will look like it did on the last U.S. tour, where it has all the the side shows, circus banners, and all that. But it's got a couple extra things added, and that one thing I'm talking about was that $250,000 quote I got today. So, but the first half, when we do the album in its entirety, it's going to look like a combination of the first album, and I'm talking about the stage set now. It'll look like a combination of the first album and what the first live show actually was. So I know that I'm giving you a couple of abstract pictures to try to put together in your head, but that's not a bad thing, and hopefully it'll be able to satisfy, what people are going to conjure up in those dark crevices they have.
From what I understand, you're going to play the album in order. Not a lot of bands do that. Sometimes they mix it up for continuity issues. But, I feel that the album itself does play well in order.
Well, here's the thing. When I'm talking to these promoters, one thing I did not take into consideration was what you're asking. Because we have never opened with I Want to Be Somebody. And so I'm talking to the first promoter, somebody I really trust. And I told him the idea, and he started squirming. It's fantastic. It's fantastic. He says, but you realize you have to do it in its proper running order, in chronological order. And I go, no, I don't. I said, as long as I just play the songs, I can do whatever I want. He goes, no, you can't. And we argue for 30 minutes. Now, again, I'm on the inside of the bubble. I'm not seeing it like everybody else. And finally, he threw a question at me that I could then make sense out of. He goes, Led Zeppelin gets back together, and they're going to play Zeppelin 4, and you go. You want to hear that album in its proper running order? And I stopped dead in my tracks. And I said, yeah, I do. So, but again, when you're on the inside, you just don't see things like everybody else does. But then that freaked me out, because I thought, how do we open? I mean, how's Kiss going to open with Rock and Roll All Night? Where do you go from there? So we came up with an idea we think is going to work. So, like I said, we will play the record in its chronological order, but I won't tell you what this thing is. I'm saying that I believe is going to make it make sense. So I'm hoping that we'll. I'm convinced it'll work. I have no doubt it's going to work.
Now, going back to revisit the album.
This is coming from the same guy that argued not playing it in chronological order. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Going back and revisiting the album, I'm sure there's a couple of songs that you haven't played very often, maybe Hellion, maybe Torment or something like that. Is there a song that you discovered on the debut recently that you were like, hey, you know what? This is really good. I wish we would have, featured it more throughout the years.
The Flame. We did it on the last tour. We hadn't done it for 40 years. And it was just, I had the most fun playing that song all night. It was just like, and I'm thinking to myself, what took so long? And it's like, but you know what we did in January of this year? We went in the studio and we rehearsed and we played this thing, because you find a lot of times the way we remember things and the way they are is two different things. And sometimes you have to do what we call arena-izing a song, because when you record stuff, it has a different feel than it does live. And sometimes those songs don't translate the same live as they do in the studio, and vice versa. So if it's not translating live, you got to punch it up a little bit. You'll see bands that have stuff from a catalog that goes back, 4 or 5 decades. And those early songs don't really have the same live impact. They can be great songs and people love them. But when they're played against newer material that is more polished, more professional sounding, those old songs that people have romanced in their heads for so long sometimes will pale by comparison. I know that's hard to imagine, but they will. So what you have to do is you have to, what we call arena-ize them. You have to make them bigger. And sometimes that means making subtle changes that the audience would never notice, but it makes them bigger, makes them more bombastic. And so we went in the studio, and there was a couple of things we had to work on to get it like that. But when we were done, I went, okay, we're finished. This will work. Because I wanted to make sure before we even tested this on the promoters that we knew what we were talking about. I didn't want to dangle a carrot in front of everybody and then get in rehearsals for the tour and go, oops. That'd be pretty bad, to get in a situation like that.
Did W.A.S.P ever play the debut album in its entirety back in 1984?
Yeah, we did, because it was, when we were opening for Kiss or whoever, that's all we had. We didn't have anything else. So, I think somebody said the other day the running order, the duration of the record was 42 minutes. And that was pretty much what we would have done opening. We would have been allowed 45 minutes, as an opener back then. So it was pretty much right on the money. But like I said, you get the second record and then you start cherry picking, what's good on the second record. And then something has to get sacrificed from the first album to do that. And the same as you go for every preceding album after that, the first, you start using the best of the best of the best. And a lot of things, get pushed onto the back burner because of that. But it's inevitable.
The North American tour kicks off October 26th, runs through December 14th. Once that's done, do you have plans to head overseas with this tour?
Yeah, we'll take it. I think we're starting in March, from what I saw the other day. The dates haven't been released yet because they're still working on a couple of venues to get them where we wanted. But it was funny because when we made this announcement, we made the announcement for the U.S. market. Australia, Germany, you name it. They're all having a hissy fit, because, well, what about us? Well, just hold on a second. We'll get around to it. We were just there in those places. It's a big wide world out there, and it takes a while to get every place, and everybody thinks they're getting treated like, the ugly stepchild, and that's not the case at all. We'll get around to them.
You were talking earlier about kind of being in this artist bubble when talking to promoters. I was reading a couple interviews with you when it came to the VIP Q&A sessions that you had during the last U.S. tour. And you said that you learned a lot about your fans and how they digest your music. What are some of the things that you learned that you really weren't aware of?
The first thing was what I had been missing, because for all these years, we had never done anything like this before. Some bands have been, this has been a fairly common practice for almost 30 years now, and we still never had done it. And I looked at it, and to be honest with you, it kind of gave me the creeps a little bit, because I saw what other bands were doing, and they were taking pictures and signing autographs, and that was it, and they were gone. And I thought, if I was going to, forget the money for a second. If I was going to take the time to actually go meet this person and they're just, wham, bam, thank you, ma'am. That's not what I would want. So, I started thinking, well, what would I like? And I came up with the idea of doing the question and answer thing, because the one thing that's really over the years that has really bothered me was when I would meet people, it was usually in public settings, and public settings, when there's a lot of people, can be chaotic. And you got 10 people talking to you all at the same time, and you're trying to answer all of them. And for me, that becomes incredibly frustrating, because you really can't give each one the individual attention that you would like. And that frustrated me for a long time. And as a matter of fact, to the point where I got a bad rap. People thought, he doesn't want to talk to people. No, it wasn't that at all. It was just so chaotic. And I had watched, again, what other performers would do, and they would pay them lip service. And it was as phony as the day was long. And I despised that. And I thought, I don't want any part of it. So we came up with this idea. Like I said, it ended up being a situation where we had a controlled environment. It's quiet, everybody's respectful, and when they speak, when they're talking to me, it's very conversational, like what we're doing right now, and so they'll ask me something and I'll respond and I'll ask them something back, and you go back and forth and you learn. And hey, when you got people telling you, what certain songs have meant to them in their lives, and their eyes start welling up as they're speaking, how can you see that and witness that and not be moved by that? So, and things that I wouldn't think, again, like what we were just talking about playing the first record, because, again, I'm on the inside of the bubble, things that I might not think are that big of a deal. And somebody would say, hey, when you wrote da-da-da-da-da-da-da, this changed my life radically. I was on the verge of committing suicide. And how do you hear that on a daily basis and not be moved by it? And that's why I said, when it was all said and done, I thought, I wish I would have started doing this years ago, because I got at least as much out of it as they did, because it was a controlled environment. And everybody said that, that was there. They said they could see that I was having fun, and I was. And truth be known, for me, I might have been certainly, I would say, equal to the performances itself later in the evening.
For the upcoming North American tour, you have tour openers Death Angel and Unto Others. Had W.A.S.P. ever crossed in the same circles as Death Angel back in the 80s?
No, not back then, but, we've played with some other bands, that, do stuff like that. And some, I think it makes, a good balance for shows, because, I came from a time where when you played or when you went to a show, there was a lot of diversity up there. And I can remember going to shows and seeing Slade, King Crimson, and Robin Trower all on the same bill, and you didn't give it a second thought. It was just a rock show. And look at some of the old Fillmore marquees. That's what was common back then. So we're not reinventing the wheel here. We're going back to what we think, gives people more bang for the buck.
Going back to the 2022 tour, it was W.A.S.P's first time back in the U.S. in about 10 years. Was there a particular moment or stop along the way that stood out to you for that tour?
No, I would have to say I look at it as the totality of it, the wholeness of it, because it's kind of like, a friend that you haven't seen for a long time, and you're not sure how either one of you are going to react. And then you start talking, and then you realize 30 seconds into it, it's like, maybe you hadn't seen those people for 10 or 15 years, but you start talking, and a few seconds into it, it's like no time had passed at all. And it's like you realize why you were friends in the first place. And it's very similar to that. It's very, very personal for me.
Let's go back to 1984, August 17th, the self-titled debut. You said earlier it was an angry album from an angry band. Why don't you tell me how the band ended up getting signed to Capitol to release this album?
Well, when we first started, I wrote about 95% of the record about a year before the band got together. And so I was just looking for guys to go in and demo. Because if you lived in LA, especially at that time, you realized playing live was not the way you were going to get a record deal. You had to make the best presentation tape or demo tape you could make, and then you shopped it around to the labels, and that's how you got a deal. So we did that. You know, we made the demo, shopped it around, waited about 6 weeks, and we weren't getting any response. And again, living here in LA, you know that if you're going to hear from a label, it's usually going to be within a couple of weeks. So 6 weeks had gone by, we weren't hearing anything. And so we said, you know, we think we've got something musically here. Why don't we take it out in front of people and see how the people react? So then that begs the question, okay, what are we going to do in the presentation? You know, are we going to stand there and get arrested for loitering, you know, for not doing anything? Or are we going to do something, you know, that effectively boils down to entertaining ourselves? And that's how it started, you know, because we had a dark, wicked sense of humor. And again, you put that anger in the mix, which here's the funny part. You don't even know you have. It just feels normal. You know, you're walking around biting bullets in half all the time and don't realize you're doing it. You're just being you. You know, they tell you in show business, just be yourself. That's what we were doing. And so, you know, that thing starts to catch fire. And it's like, whoa, ho, we got a tiger by the tail here, you know. And the more ridiculous the things we did, the bigger it got. You know, so, and we were having fun with it. So, you know, we're looking at the labels. Nobody's really paying attention, but there was an independent label here in LA at the time. It was called Enigma. And there was two guys called Bill and Wes Hine. They were brothers. And they wanted the band bad. And we were really, really considering going with them. We told them we needed $75,000, and that was a lot of money back then for an independent label. It still is, actually, but back then it was really a lot. So at the time all that's going on, I meet Rod Smallwood, and he's got Maiden already, but Maiden are not anywhere near what they would end up becoming. You know, they've only made a couple of records at this point, so they're still an up-and-coming band. But I spent a couple of days with Rod, and I realized I had found my partner. Because as all that was going on, I was very close to signing with Bill Aucoin, who managed Kiss. And because I had known Bill from way back from Ace. And as a matter of fact, Bill and Ace came to the second show that we ever did at the Troubadour. And so I was 5 minutes away from signing with Bill, and I met Rod, and I realized Rod was my partner. And so because Rod had a relationship with EMI and Capitol, because of Maiden, he goes to them. Now they see management that they feel they have confidence in. They became very interested. So we go back and forth and back and forth. We held the Enigma thing in front of them and said, hey, if you don't give us what we want, we're going to go with these guys over here. We ended up signing with Capitol, and we signed the largest deal in history for any previous unsigned band. It was for $2.5 million then. And I was having lunch with Rod a few weeks ago, and he reminded me of something I had forgotten totally about, because, you know, here's a label that's balking at the amount of money that they're going to have to cough up, not sure really how it works, you know, because they didn't understand Maiden, and they certainly didn't understand us. So they didn't know how we were doing what we were doing and why it was working. But they pull out their checkbook and they ante up. The record's released. They made all their money back the very first day. And so everybody was, you know, going around patting each other on the back. And I'm talking about the label guys now, you know, all saying, oh, I knew it all along. I knew it all. And they were all happy, and everybody shut up and never heard any more about it after that. But that's the record company business for you.
The internet is kind of wishy-washy on music history because mainly it didn't exist 40 years ago. I had a question about Animal, the single. I've read that it was supposed to appear on the debut album, and I've heard two different versions of why I didn't make it. One was because they wanted to market the album in chain retail stores, and the other one I heard was pressure by the Parents Music Resource Center, the PMRC. So which was it?
Neither. What happened was the whole PMRC thing didn't happen until later. What happened was when, again, Capitol Records here in America is the sister company of the parent company EMI, which is out of London. Well, so we signed, with both. Somebody in the government over in the UK got wind of what was going on. They have a thing over there called Queen's Council. It would be the equivalent of our Congress here. They found out what was going on with that single. They issued an order to the three heads of EMI in London, and they told them, if you put that single out or you include it on a record, all three of you are going to jail for 28 days each. Now, this is the label that has the Beatles and the Beach Boys, Frank Sinatra. They ain't going to jail for us. So it was to my knowledge, and I don't think it had happened before or since. I wouldn't quote this, but to my knowledge, I don't think a situation like that had ever happened where once a major label had signed an artist that they backed away and allowed an independent label to come in and release a record after they had signed that act. And like I said, I mean, don't quote me on that, but I have never heard of that before or since because it was such an unusual situation. And, I understand those guys didn't want to go to jail. I mean, you're talking about when the first Kerrang cover, the magazine that had me on it with the, all bloody with a skull and all that, their national chain of magazine stands there. It's called HMS. And they banned it from all the bookshops. Now, as soon as they do that, every kid in the UK wants that magazine.
Right.
It ended up becoming the biggest seller they ever had. So it was all these things were playing into our favor, and, it made us look like geniuses, and that we had no hand in any of it. But that's just the way it goes down sometimes.
And looking back on it after 40 years, it seems like the things that, that we'll call it quote unquote controversial, the things that people had issues with seem pretty tame today, looking back on it.
Yes and no. I see a society now that is incredibly sensitive. So they can be bombarded visually and, with whatever goes on the internet. But at the same time, they can be incredibly sensitive. So I think there's a yin and a yang going on at the same time, and it's schizophrenic as far as the way I see it. I mean, I don't really understand how someone can claim to be as sensitive as they are, but yet at the same time be as exposed to the things that they are. I'm thinking from a different time, so I don't see how someone could legitimately say that they're offended by something when there's so much more that they're either involved in or participating in that doesn't seem to move them at all. So, like I said, you got a dichotomy, a duality, of thought here.
I guess I was looking at it as someone that had been around in the 80s versus kind of today's climate, but you make a very good point there. Does that kind of...
Well, it seems like, when we first got started, people could take a joke.
Right.
And there's a lot of that missing now.
Does that make it difficult to either present the stage show in a certain way, or does it make it prohibitive in kind of composing new music as well?
Again, I think yes and no, because it depends on the artist. It depends on if the artist even cares. There's some guys out there, and I consider myself one of them, just don't give a shit. It's like you're going to do what you're going to do, and if folks like it, they do, and if they don't, well, okay, find something else. Be happy. I look at it like this. One of the questions I hear a lot is everything's been done. People are completely saturated. You cannot shock the audience anymore. That is so untrue. You could shock an audience. As a matter of fact, I believe it would be easier today to shock an audience. Even with what we had just talked about people's duality, in their thinking, I believe it would be easier to do it today than it was back then because of their lack of sense of humor. And it depends, hey, if I wanted to go out on stage with a turban on my head and start spewing all kinds of foul stuff about religions I don't care for, I'd get folks' attention real fast.
That's true. What was...
and to a point where it would freak promoters out so bad they wouldn't book you.
And we're seeing this with stand-up comedians right now.
But, you got to applaud these guys, because they're standing up for the truth. And to be honest with you, I'm almost surprised that it took as long as it did. I mean, you had guys like Chappelle that stood up first, but he's of that mindset. Like what I'm talking about. You have to be somebody, if you care a lot, you're going to toe the line. And if you don't give a shit, you won't. And you're going to either let that type of thinking control you as an artist, or you're going to say, damn the torpedoes, Jack, I'm going to be me. And if you don't like it, don't watch it.
Absolutely. Getting back to the release of the first album, it comes out, everybody's happy about it. What does touring look like in '84 for W.A.S.P?
Well, everything was new, that's for sure. You're going to all these places you've heard about. Every day is an adventure, and it would be difficult for me to relate it to probably most other bands because we blew up so quickly. The circus around us started pretty much immediately. And to give you an example, we leave LA to go to the UK to rehearse for 2 weeks to do our pre-production before the first tour starts over there. And when we leave LA, we leave on Sunday afternoon. We arrive there, it's Monday afternoon. We're coming in from the airport, or at the airport, the press is there to meet us. No one told us press was going to be there. We stumble off the plane drunk. I mean, we've never done this before. Now we're going to lead the rock and roll lifestyle, right? We were hammered getting off there. I'm trying to talk to these guys, and I can't put 2 or 3 words together. So anyway, we get in the car, start heading towards the hotel, and we stopped at a traffic light, and I looked over, and there was a newsstand. And it's very common in the UK. They have the headlines of whatever that evening's newspaper is. They have it in big, bold print, like on a sandwich board, right out in front of the newsstand. And it'll only read the headline. And, it's like 3 feet high by 3 feet wide. It's huge. You can't miss it when you're sitting at a light. And I look over to the side, and in big, bold print, it says, American Sex and Blood Rock Group, banned in Ireland. And the first thing I thought was, who the hell is coming over here stealing our thunder after we did all of this that we did? We didn't know from the time we left L.A., and 12 hours later, you land, Ireland had decided that we weren't going to play there. They banned us. We got banned in Norway. We got banned in a bunch of places. And all that started happening very quickly. We get to the UK. We have a priest that's following us around with a Catholic congregation of about 200 people, and they're attending every show. And I mean, it really turned into a circus very quickly. And this was going on every day. Then you start, we come back to America, and we hear this murmurings of this thing called the PMRC. We have no idea what that is. We would come to find out very quickly, up close and personal, what they were about. And so, like I said, all this was happening on a daily basis, and pretty soon it got to be normal. The death threats got to be normal. We got thousands. I got shot at twice. Bomb scares. I can't tell you how many bomb scares we had. So this became a daily routine, and it seemed normal until you reach a point where you wake up one day. And I remember where I was when I woke up. We were playing an arena in Toledo, Ohio, on the Electric Circus tour. And that was the moment I woke up, and I said, how long are we going to go on like this? And I couldn't do it anymore like that. I was starting to crack.
I would imagine that's a lot of pressure, especially for a young man.
Like I said, one time I got one of my cars tampered with, where the front left wheel came off when I started driving, and it came off while I was on the freeway. FBI comes in, does an investigation. They go to my mechanic, it was a Jaguar XKE, and I had one guy who worked on that car exclusively, nobody else. And he looked at it, and he told me, he says, you should have been dead a long time ago. Somebody's been tampering with this wheel. So now we have that going on. The FBI tells me they think it's a good idea that I don't live by myself anymore. So a couple of crew guys have to come in and live with me while we were in L.A. making the second record. So it's stuff like that. Your life starts to change. And it's just, like I said, it's not any one thing that happens. I mean, for me, it was, the way I described it, it was like when you first start, you feel like you're this brick wall and nobody can knock you down. But as you go on and the days start to add up, you start to feel like there's this draft coming behind you. And it's like this cool breeze and you don't know where it's coming from. And you turn around and look and half your wall is gone. Because what happens is it's very sneaky. It doesn't happen overnight. Somebody comes and steals a brick a day. But you put enough of those together and pretty soon half your wall's gone. And like I said, it happens without you even knowing. It's very, very sneaky, very, very subversive the way it happens, and it starts to add up on your psyche. And I know somebody listening to this might say, oh, you got everything you want, why are you complaining about it? Well, I'm not. If it sounds like I'm complaining, I don't mean to. You asked me the question, what it was like, and I'm saying it was probably not like what other bands were experiencing. And you'd be hard-pressed. There's maybe, I don't know, 20 bands in history that have gone through something like this, and they'll all tell you the same thing, that it gets to be a bit much after a while.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Obviously, you don't face any of these things anymore now that things are ramping back up again in the States, right?
You'd be surprised.
Yeah.
You would be surprised, yeah.
Well, I'm glad that you're persevering on in the face of that kind of crap.
Well, I'll give you an example. I mean, I live in the greater LA area, but I don't live in LA. I live about an hour and a half north. And I live in a place where it's all ranch properties and stuff, and it's very, very remote. And that is a byproduct of what I went through at that time. It made me much more reclusive. And, I enjoy going into the cities, when we're playing and stuff. But when I'm not doing it, I prefer to be out here. We joke out here, we got more cows and horses than we got people. And that's the way I like it.
Shifting gears, would you consider re-recording the debut album much like you did with Crimson Idol, which came out actually great in 2018?
Well, we don't need to, because we're going to put a package set together. We demoed the record 3 different times before the actual first album was released. And I know this is going to sound like a sales pitch to you, but I'm telling you the honest truth. Those demos, if I had it to do over again, I would have never recorded the album for EMI like we did. We would have given them the demos, especially the third round of demos. There's a ferocity and a viciousness to those demos that by the time we got to recording the record, because you're trying to make everything so perfect, you lose a lot of your edge in that. And if I had to do it again, I would have told them, no, you take the demos as it is. I mean, major labels don't want to do that. They want you to re-record it under their banner flying under their flag because they get to own the masters when you do that.
Right.
Well, hey, we would have done a deal with them where, we were sold on the masters, whatever. But like I said, that's 20/20 hindsight. And, it takes every band, a number of years to learn that, what they can and can't do later on. But like I said, we're going to put a package together and release all those demos. So as far as I'm concerned, the best version of those that exist, the world has not yet heard.
That sounds actually exciting for W.A.S.P fans, especially myself, and I'm looking forward to that. On the touring end of things, after the 40th anniversary of the debut tour winds down, would you consider celebrating The Last Command in 2025 or Electric Circus in 2026?
Boy, that's pretty far down the road. Let's get through this one first. We ain't even started yet.
Touche. How about new music? Is W.A.S.P working on new music? Your last studio album was Golgotha in 2015.
We have been, and last year we had done quite a bit of work before we did the in between the American tour and the European tour. We did a lot of recording, a lot of demoing. And I thought I liked what I was hearing, and then I came back. I had a problem with my back last year when we were in Europe, and actually my back got broken while we were over there. But so I had to have a couple of surgeries when we got home from the tour, and it gave me a lot of time to sit around and twiddle my thumbs and just listen to stuff. And I listened to the demos that we did, and there is some good moments, but it's not consistent. Golgotha was a very consistent record. Golgotha, I think, is one of the best things I've ever been a part of. And to try to at least do something on that level, because you have to remember, every time you do, like today, a band like us, it's all about your legacy. Because we're not making records anymore to sell records. Those days are gone. But what we do, or what any artist does when they make a new record now, they are competing against their past. So your new album effectively becomes your opening act. And it's an opening act that's going up against songs that the audience has heard and romanced in their heads for decades. That's the stiff competition. So when something new comes out, for it to even be remotely considered good, in all honesty, it has to be better than the original stuff. And that's no joke. I listened to it. It had been a while since I listened to Golgotha, and I listened to it, a couple of months ago, and it was like, wow, this is a pretty good record. So, and it has to be that good to compete with the Love Machines and the I Want to Be Somebodies of the world, because again, people are romancing those songs in their head, and rightfully so, because time, our music does a funny thing to our sense of time. It creates memories, same way like smell does and things like that. We remember where we were when we heard a certain song, and those are very powerful memories. And I'm glad we have that, but at the same time, when you're the person that has to create new music, you're constantly going up against that legacy. So again, the new album will always be your opening act, and your opening act has to try harder just to get noticed.
Before I let you go, Blackie, you touched upon your recent back issues. I wanted to find out how you're doing as far as that's concerned. I know when it comes to back issues, being somebody that's had them for 20 years, people that haven't had back issues don't really understand how bad it can be.
Well, I was one of them because I'd never had any before. And what happened is we were in Madrid, in Spain, and I had I broke my right femur 11 years ago. And so because of that, I would have chiropractors come in from time to time and do some adjustments on my lower back just to keep, because my pelvis wanted to tilt because of the break. They put in an 18-inch titanium rod in my right femur to balance it out and stuff. And so because of that, the pelvis wants to tilt a little bit. So, I would have chiropractors come in. This kid comes in Madrid, and he speaks no English, and the kid is strong as a gorilla. And he got a hold of me, and he wrenched me, and we didn't know until later. He ruptured a disc in my back. And so we go to Berlin there was the doctors from the German Olympic team were there, and they examined me, and the first thing they said is, you need to stop the tour. And I said, well, how bad is this? And they said, well, it's not just what it is right now, it's what's going to happen if you keep doing these shows. And I said, well, can't you just give me something to get me through these shows, and I'll rest when the tour's done. And so they did, and I ended up doing 8 epidurals over a period of 5 weeks, because I had to keep flying back to Berlin every time we would get them. So in between shows, there were even a couple of shows that had to get canceled because of it. But we would get up in the morning early, fly back to Berlin, depending on where we were, sometimes 2 or 3 hours in a single flight, get to the hospital, because you have to do it in an operating room. You can't do it, in a doctor's office, because it's so close to the spinal cord. When they inject the needle in it, they have to see what they're doing, because if they get the medicine in the wrong place, you can be paralyzed for 9 months at a clip. So it's got to be done properly. So like I said, 8 epidurals and 180 opium tablets later to help me sleep through the tour. We realized when I got home from the tour that I had a second ruptured disc, and one of the vertebrae was broken, because when the disc collapsed, running around on stage doing a show, now you got bone on bone grinding against each other back there, and one of the vertebrae cracked.
But things are going well in the recovery?
Well, yeah, I'm 10 months into the surgeries now, and as a matter of fact, I saw the surgeon just yesterday. We're making pretty good progress. They told me from the time we did it, it was going to take a year, and it will be a year in August. But I'm getting around okay. We played Sweden Rock a couple of weeks ago, and I had to sit for that because I'm still effectively on probation, because they don't want me doing what I did last year, which is like pushing through, when I shouldn't be pushing through, to let the thing heal properly. So we've got a show coming up next week in Oslo, in Norway, and depending on I see the doctor again on Monday, and I think he's leaning on having me sit for that as well. But I'll see how far I get with my begging on Monday.
Well, Blackie, those are all the questions I have for you today. Album One Alive North American Tour kicks off October 26th in California. I know you're a busy guy, and I want to thank you for taking the time to speak with KNAC.com today. And as a fan, bucket list stuff right here.
All right, George, thanks for having me, buddy. I sure appreciate it.